Nice to meet everyone. As with all of these kind of webinars or talks that I do, like to keep these conversational. So once again, I'm not sure what the ground rules are for asking questions, but please, I would encourage you to ask any questions as they come up. By way of quick introductions, my name is Eric Martin, head of sales here at Vanta. I've been here for around 4 years. Hopefully, if nothing else, at the end of this call, you'll have a good understanding for kind of the world that we live in, which is the world of kind of automated security and compliance. Our kind of bread and butter customer is the early stage company, the folks that are kind of growing their businesses and ultimately are kind of trying to intercept or are running headfirst into kind of different security and compliance requirements, which we can hopefully help you streamline. So once again, I'll blitz through some slides here. This could take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. Want to save plenty of time at the end for questions. I give this talk in my sleep at this point, so please interrupt with questions as we go. All right. Why compliance win deals? The value of SOC 2 for growth. I put SOC 2 in brackets here because we could speak to SOC 2, but we could also speak to any other number of compliance frameworks that might become a requirement for you as you're scaling your business. So first things first, agenda, we covered intros. I'll cover what is a SOC 2, why SOC 2, typical costs and timelines, how to use your SOC 2 to accelerate the growth of your business, and then we'll save time for questions. So first things first, what is SOC 2? SOC 2 is a standard created by the American Institute of CPAs and is audited by an actual CPA. What is it literally? It is literally a PDF report that communicates your company's security processes and procedures, okay? So effectively, what will end up happening is if your business processes some level of sensitive information, at some point when you're signing your first customer or you're signing a partnership or you're signing your 100th customer, depending on kind of where they are, you're going to have to go through what is traditionally known as a security assessment or security review. And what will end up happening is kind of you'll probably first receive a security questionnaire. And don't be surprised when the top of that security questionnaire says, hey, like, have you gone through a third-party audit, a la a SOC 2, maybe ISO 27001, which is the kind of international equivalent of a SOC 2, stated simplistically. And if you can check the box yes, it's kind of like skip to the end, you know, so you're kind of like security assessment can be greatly accelerated, streamlined, etc. If not, you're gonna have to go through and answer anywhere from a dozen to a couple hundred questions about your security posture. And so more simplistically, kind of when I talk about this to folks, SOC 2 basically communicates to your partners and prospects that you're thoughtful with the vendors that you rely on to operate your business. You're thoughtful about who you give access to those vendors, and you're thoughtful about kind of how you train those people who get access so that they're operating securely on their own. Maybe it's things like you make sure they do background checks, they have antivirus installed, they have an encrypted hard drive, et cetera, et cetera. So I will share one kind of like myth with you, which is to say, just because you have a SOC 2 doesn't explicitly mean that you are a safer business, right? As we kind of sell and cater to our enterprise customers, that is like made loud and clear to us. But having a SOC 2 does demonstrate like some level of maturity from a compliance standpoint that ultimately, for better or worse, will give these prospects the level of comfort and confidence they need to bring you on as a new vendor, okay? So why SOC 2? At this stage, if you're thinking about SOC 2, it's probably because you have to. There are any number of kind of industries that you might be playing in where SOC 2 is just table stakes. And so, you know, whether or not it's a need to have today, another reason that folks are like getting it is really to accelerate the growth of their business, right? So over the years, we've helped kind of the full gamut of early stage companies. I've helped folks who are 2 people who haven't even incorporated, but they want to sign up because they're building a fintech product and they know this is table stakes. That company now has over 1,000 employees, just by chance. But we've helped other companies who are 1,000 people deep and they've never had this, but they're building a new product that, you know, processes cardholder data or has access to PII. And so therefore, in order for their sales team to like go sign those deals, like they are for the first time needing to pursue a SOC 2 in order to kind of accelerate that growth aspect of their business. I'd love to kind of, I don't know, Jackie, if I'm allowed to pause and see if there are any questions related to this yet.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, in fact, you know, if you want to save questions to the end, that might be more
Okay.
efficient, but
Cool.
happy to do whatever you prefer, Eric.
Well, we'll get to the end here. I'll blitz through this for folks, but I'm curious. I
Cool.
suspect like a lot of folks will have questions around kind of like why SOC 2. And I do want to
Yep.
highlight, I don't want this to be just kind of just about SOC 2. I mentioned earlier, there's an international framework called ISO 27001, which is very similar, right? So more often than not today, what ends up happening is when we help European customers who are selling to other European businesses, SOC or ISO rather than SOC 2 is kind of utmost importance. Another really common use case there is when we're helping American-based businesses who are expanding internationally, and all of a sudden ISO becomes important. It's also worth mentioning that, like, you know, there are other frameworks that are probably more familiar to you, at least from like a kind of verbiage standpoint, things like HIPAA, things like GDPR, things like CCPA. These are other frameworks that we've built software to help streamline in the spirit of helping you kind of get through these exercises in a much more kind of like timely and cost efficient manner. Speaking of kind of costs and timelines, if you want to sound smart when you're asked a question about compliance, pro tip, just respond, it depends, because compliance is about as nuanced as it gets. In regards to like how quickly can you get a SOC 2, we've seen companies get a SOC 2 type 1 report in hand in 5 days and it costs them $8,000. Typically, we say this is going to cost you 40 human hours, right? More often than not, what ends up happening is when you kind of decide to tackle SOC 2, this is a decision that like you're going to take very seriously. The entire company, there's probably not going to be many of you at this point in time, kind of are fully on board with kind of justifying spending the time and dollars to get this done for some like very valid business reason. If you were to go about approaching SOC 2 without using software like Vanta, this 40 hours is more like you should expect to spend more like 200 hours. And you're like, wow, why the difference? Like, why? How are you going to save me 160 hours? Well, the kind of approach is just entirely different. So without Avanta, you're going to a CPA directly. You're hiring them to perform what is called a readiness assessment. That's where kind of like they will do over the course of 5 to 10 days what Vanta does in 30 minutes. You know, the way in which our software works is we start by connecting via read-only APIs to key vendors that you use, whether it's like your cloud provider, your IDP, et cetera. And we run tests against that on the hour. Those tests kind of output a to-do list of, in simple terms here, a to-do list of kind of tests that are passing and tests that are failing that you need to get into a passing state before the auditor can come in and conduct the audit. And so the time savings here is twofold. It's for you, it's also for our CPA partners. So Vanta is not a CPA firm. We partner with CPAs who we have built a separate product for, such that like not only are you getting this done in 40 hours, but their time that they might otherwise spend is getting cut by 80 to 90% as well. So in any case, if you have more questions about kind of costs, times, et cetera, happy to address those at the end. But this, like where we are today, right? Like if you're an early stage company, you're 2, 3, 4, 10, 15 to 20 people, like you can get this done all in at a cost of, let's call it like $10,000 to $20,000. And if this is a top priority for you, you get this thing banged out over the course of, a single working week. In terms of using your SOC 2, the ways in which you'll use this will kind of naturally present themselves to you, right? So as I mentioned earlier, you're going about growing your business, you're having some initial conversations, even for folks that are like, design partners for you, for those that are really early stage, it's not uncommon that they're going to have you go through some kind of security assessment, right? And so, and that's probably going to take the form of this questionnaire that I talked about, where like at the top of that questionnaire, it's going to ask like, have you done a SOC or ISO? Yes, no. If yes, proceed to go. If no, like, please fill out these questions. And so matter of fact, like having the thing, as I said, using it's going to be obvious to you. You're going to check the box, yes. Another way in which you can use the SOC 2 is in the form of like a public security status webpage. So all of you presumably have a marketing website. I would be very impressed if any of you have a security page on your marketing website already. For those who do, kudos to you. For those who don't, no sweat. Like this is very uncommon for early stage companies. That said, Vanta's built a product kind of baked into our platform called a trust report that allows you to more publicly kind of demonstrate the maturity of your kind of security and compliance posture. This is a screenshot of ours. So if you were to go to Vanta or trust.vanta.com, you can see kind of a description of our business. You can see kind of security or compliance controls that are kind of currently in a passing state because we're running these tests on the hour. You can kind of behind an NDA get access to our security audits. So like our SOC 2, our ISO report, you can see kind of GDPR and CCPA kind of documentation if we've used a third-party auditor to help us there. In any case, once again, like there's a big emphasis on like how to use your SOC 2, how to use your ISO. My short answer for founders and for early stage employees is it's going to be obvious, right? In terms of like how to use this thing. If you want to go to the next level and have a security page on your website, it's only going to do you good in the context of like, frankly, helping partners and prospects take you that much more seriously. And that is kind of all I have for now, besides like a special offer to folks here. So Jackie, now's a good time for.
Oh yeah,
Q&A.
let's do it. And let's not forget that special offer too. We
Yeah.
revisit it at the end before you go. It'd be great for now if you could stop sharing your screen just so we could have like a conversation.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much. All right, let's get these questions rolling. So Kunal's asking, when is the SOC 2 reporting required? I know that you kind of touched on it, but a couple other questions like how early is too early? When should we get started?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, we used to joke here that our sales team's second full-time job was to help companies avoid or delay getting a SOC 2, just because your time is valuable, and like your time is better spent kind of doing things like building and testing new product features, signing new customers, etc. That said, there are certain kind of industries that where SOC 2 is going to be table stakes. So I mentioned earlier, you're building a fintech business, you're building let's call it like an ed tech business. If you're building any kind of company where you're going to be accessing any level of sensitive data, and like interpret that really kind of loosely right now, because any SaaS company, you could argue that any SaaS company is accessing some level of sensitive data, then don't be surprised if this comes up. With regard to like, when is it too early to start? I love signing companies, or I love when our reps sign up companies who are really, really early stages. Like they don't even have like an AWS account yet, right? And but they know this is table stakes. And so one of the benefits of getting plugged in with Vanta, even before you have those vendors in place, is that it ensures that you're building your product in a compliance kind of like SOC 2 kind of appropriate manner, if that makes sense. So kind of like, how do you use the SOC 2? It's going to pop out to you. Similar answer to like, when should we get started? Is early too early? I think like in your conversations with advisors, early customers, et cetera, it's going to present itself. I just want to make sure that you know that like there are options out there that are kind of approachable for companies of your size.
Yeah, great. And a related question, Mike, is asking who, yes, like, and by whom? Like who is requiring the reporting? Who are you showing it to?
Yeah, it's a good question. So more often than not, what ends up happening is that like these, let's say I remember like Vanta early days. I was here about 4 years ago, right? And we were like just getting going, and we're having our first conversations with potential customers. Effectively, the short answer here is it depends on your sales cycle, but more often than not, the people at these kind of partner or prospect accounts that are going to ask you for this are probably going to come from their IT or security or compliance teams. And once again, like you'll know, like your point of contact at the company will communicate to you, hey, we need you to go through a security review. Like either can you fill out this questionnaire, and then depending on your answers, like the deal just keeps moving forward. Or if their security team has questions about something that you've submitted, that security person will be introduced to you, or as I mentioned, maybe an IT or compliance person, depending on how big the org is.
Great. And some of these, you may have touched on part of it, but I think considering the topic, it's worth kind of repeating. So Rob's asking, how do you find balance of compliance with being a startup that is, really early on? So I think it's a question of like resources and prioritization, the eternal question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. As I mentioned, right? Like my kind of message to you all is, avoid spending time doing this for as long as you can, right? Knowing now that there are things or like products and businesses like Vanta that are available to you to help you get this done in the span of a week. With regard to kind of balancing the time, as I mentioned earlier, right? Like SOC 2 effectively kind of, as I said, it outwardly it kind of communicates that you're being thoughtful with the vendors you use, how you use them, who has access, et cetera. One case to be made for kind of hitting the ground early on this is that a lot of the kind of processes that SOC 2 and ISO like require you to adopt are just best practice kind of business operation processes, right? So it's for lack of a better word, it's like kind of a forcing function for you to start doing business responsible things. I'll use the employee security as an example, which is like today you may not do background checks on your employees or yourself, right? Like as you scale, that's going to become required no matter what. You may not have an information security policy in place. Like it's never too early to get one of those in place. You may not kind of require employees to have kind of encrypted hard drives. Like you're going to have to do these things eventually. You know, there's something to be said about kind of like building good habits early. Is kind of a weird answer to that question.
No, that's great. Thank you. Canal's asking, if you use all trusted vendors like AWS, Stripe, et cetera, do you still require SOC 2 independently?
Oh man, great question. So the number of companies who we talked to, or at least used to talk to, where it was like, we don't need a SOC 2 because AWS has a SOC 2. I think I literally wrote like a LinkedIn article about this at one point. AWS's SOC 2 doesn't count for you, mostly because AWS will be one of multiple vendors that will be in scope for your audit. And as I mentioned a second ago, the SOC 2 effectively communicates that you are using AWS responsibly and you're thoughtful about who has access to AWS and that those people are kind of like doing the right things. Vanta, for instance, I think we run 70 different tests against AWS just to make sure that you're using it as designed in a SOC 2 compliant manner. So that is the kind of literal kind of like, I guess like, I don't want to say legal, but like appropriate answer for you. The short answer is this: if I'm in your position and you're using vendors that all have a SOC 2, try to use that as an excuse to like kind of get through these initial kind of risk assessments, because you'd be shocked at how often it works. So if you ever hear saying, hey, we use GitHub, we use Google, we use AWS, when you're going through an assessment, if you have their kind of SOC 2 reports on file, try it. You know, I've seen at this point hundreds of kind of heads of InfoSec kind of, I think probably inappropriately accepting that. But it's their decision to take on that risk.
Awesome. A vendor is asking, they're actually currently researching a SOC 2 vendor partner, and so many vendors have honestly surfaced in just the last couple of years. Would you be willing to share how founders should really evaluate prospective vendors like Vanta? How do you differentiate? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, it's funny because 4 years ago, we were kind of the only show in town and kind of discovered gold. And when you discover gold, and this will happen to many of you out here, right? Like you're onto something, and you know other people are going to learn that you've come onto something good. And depending on how defensible that business is, you might find yourselves in the spot that we are, where I think on last count we had like 31 direct people who had kind of since built Avanta after we kind of created this category. My recommendation to you all is really full court press these vendors on kind of the number of tests that they run versus the number of controls they ask you to adopt. And so one of the benefits of kind of having been in this space or created this space is that kind of out of the gates, we acknowledge, or we know that like a company of your size is only going to end up adopting, you know, let's call it 70 to 80 controls. Other vendors out there, for whatever reason, still insist on asking you out of the gates to adopt 150 to 200 controls. That's a lot of processes and procedures for you to adopt at such an early stage. And so once again, I'm asking vendors kind of, you know, how many controls am I gonna have to adopt out of the gates? How many tests you have mapped against those controls? You know, is your kind of test to control coverage ratio greater than 1 or less than 1? If it's greater than 1, you're in a really good spot. And then I'm biased here, but like, you know, it's one thing to help a company through an audit cycle once, and you learn a lot when you support a company there, but you learn a heck of a lot more when you help that company through their second and third audit cycle. And so this is where, like, you know, while Vanta has, let's call it 3 to 5x more customers than our next closest competitor, we have helped over 50x more companies through 2 to 3 or 4 audit cycles compared to anyone else. And so that's where we take a lot of pride. And this is really where, like, I think people kind of continue to choose us, is because they can see and feel the maturity of the actual platform. But it's a tough decision. And the reality is, like, there are a lot of good vendors out there. But I do think that like it's really important to hammer on kind of those two kind of quantifiable things that I just mentioned.
Awesome. A few more. Ashley's asking, do corporates want SOC 2 or SOC 1? I'm planning our SOC 2 call with 2 airlines on Thursday and wondering if SOC 1 is enough. I'm not sure if that's kind of specific.
Yeah, so a SOC 1 is more of a financial controls audit, whereas SOC 2 is more of a kind of like an IT/security controls audit. So I think actually my advice there would be I would probably reach out to that airline or those airlines before the conversation on Thursday and just be explicit, like, hey, like, just to be clear, are we talking about SOC 2 or SOC 1? Because it's very different.
Great, thank you. Kevin's asking, is SOC 2 only for B2B or do B2C startups need SOC 2 also?
Ooh, it's a great question. Both. We have any number of B2C companies who kind of, once again, right? Like, let's use the example of someone like Calm, right? Like the meditation app. You log in, you're giving them some level of like, personally identifiable information around yourself. And, a lot of these B2C companies also have B2B arms, and or kind of partner with kind of local agencies and or governments who, for their own reasons, like require these companies to go through and demonstrate kind of different levels of kind of compliance maturity. So I guess the answer is both. And once again, like, it'll pop out to you. I will say it's much more common for B2B companies to go attack this early versus B2C. We've signed, actually just in the last kind of month or so, a couple dozen quite large B2C companies who are kind of just now getting on this, but that usually comes as they are expanding or building out their B2B function.
Great. Thank you. Robert's asking, what are 3 most common SOC 2 exposures that Vanta finds during an audit?
Oh my God,
Are
this
you
is
allowed
funny.
to reveal that?
I'm laughing because I don't know the answer. I'm laughing also because we have a full in-house team of CPAs, ISO certifiers, SOC 2 QSAs, security experts, and they're all doing an offsite right outside this office door right now. And so they would have a great answer. I have no idea. I will say that Vanta is also the only platform that uniquely doesn't expose every test failure right away to the auditor. We acknowledge that when you're kind of defining your controls and your processes and procedures internally, you're giving yourselves some SLA for kind of fixing things. And so it's only fair that if we flag a failing test to you as it relates to kind of like a SOC 2 control, that you also get to set an SLA for how kind of quickly you get or how much time you get to fix that thing. And so once again, really proud of our product team for building this. We're the only tool that does this now. What that means is that, like with any other tool, if one of your employees doesn't have MFA for an hour, when the auditor logs in, they're going to see that as a red blip and the auditor is going to ask you a question about it. But if your policy says, we when someone doesn't have MFA, kind of we give ourselves, 3 days to remediate that, then like as long as you get that test fixed within 3 days, when the auditor logs into your Vanta instance, they're not going to see that little red blip, because what's the point? Like, humans are operating your business, at least today, and like humans are error prone. So like it's a really nice, I think, empathetic gesture on our product team's part.
Awesome. Sushant's asking, when would you require SOC 2 Type 2? How long does it take to collect reports to get Type 2 audit completed?
Yeah, really good question. So one thing that I glossed over in the kind of presentation, or I didn't include this, was there are 2 types of SOC 2 reports. There's a SOC 2 Type 1 and there's a SOC 2 Type 2. A SOC 2 Type 1 is a point-in-time report. It's actually technically a rolling audit. So what that means is that, like, as you're going about kind of like doing the things that the auditor cares about, the auditor can be checking them off. And then like once you are done with all those things, you're good to go. The SOC 2 Type 2 is it takes place over what we call an observation window. So for kind of simplicity's sake, let's call it like a continuous audit. This observation window can be anywhere from 3 to 12 months. For us, the first time we did a Type 2, we did a 3-month window. Basically what this says is that, like, okay, cool, like from this date to this date, we kind of like kept our ducks in a row, and kind of here's our proof of doing so. And so from a kind of requirement standpoint, there are certain things that are like kind of niche things that are kind of uniquely required for a Type 2, but really like the kind of elementary understanding of this is that SOC 2 Type 1, point in time, SOC 2 Type 2, continuous. And this is where the benefit of kind of Vanta running tests on the hour and alerting you or your appropriate team members becomes really advantageous, because like we're going to make sure that you know when things are out of line and have the time to go fix them before kind of the auditor comes in at the end.
Great.
Great
Robert,
questions, by the way.
yeah, these are great questions. Robert is here. Which CPA firms does Vanta work with regularly?
Yeah, so we partner with over 50 different CPA firms right now, ranging from like boutique firms in Kansas City up to kind of the big 4. And the way in which we partner with them is as I said, they're kind of customers of ours in a way, where we kind of get to know them, we kind of train them and certify them on kind of conducting these audits using our tool. It's really important that all the CPAs, ISO certifiers, et cetera, are going to maximally leverage the platform. That's the whole point, right? The whole point is that like they're using Vanta so that you don't have to get on Zoom calls with them. You don't have to give them screenshots or spreadsheets, et cetera. So the answer is kind of most of them today, all but a few. Really.
Great. We got a couple more. Hope we can get through these if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's great questions.
Yeah, these are really great questions. Ashley's asking, do you need to hire a compliance officer, or does Vanta provide one for hire as a service?
That's a great question. So one of the so the short answer is you do not need to hire a compliance officer, and we also I don't want to say we do not provide one. I think the kind of better way to think about this is that by leveraging Vanta, if you don't yet have a security or compliance hire, kind of we've designed this in a way such that it is so easy for you to delegate to the appropriate stakeholders, and so easy for you to kind of have that kind of interaction with the auditor, that similar to my thing earlier about like, we're gonna help you like delay getting a SOC 2 as long as possible. This is going to help you kind of like delay needing to make that first security or compliance hire. I will say, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a fully staffed team of in-house CPAs, security experts, et cetera, who are just part of your account team when you join. And that's even if you're a 2-person startup, which once again, we probably should charge professional services for, but we don't. So congrats to all of you. It just comes with the service or the application.
Great. Awesome. And last couple are related to HIPAA. How can Vanta help with HIPAA compliance, given there's no central agency, as far as I know, that issues/monitors certification for HIPAA? And the follow-up, how much would a HIPAA compliance for a B2C or B2B2C company typically cost?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are any number of kind of frameworks in Vanta that we support that don't require third-party attestation. So things like GDPR, HIPAA, et cetera. In those instances, what ends up happening is that like auditors, as a means of making money, will offer to kind of go through and confirm all of the things that are passing within Vanta, just to give you that extra little level of confidence. But 99% of our customers that kind of need to be HIPAA compliant, as long as we can connect to the key systems we need to, and they're getting kind of the appropriate tests into a passing state, they can very confidently kind of like go tell customers that they're HIPAA compliant, they can sign BAAs, et cetera. So yeah, it's a really good question. And then maybe with 0 minutes left, can I share the offer real quick?
Please do. And we'll also make sure everyone will get a copy of your slides,
oh, cool.
and also
Nice.
the video, so they'll see it there too.
Sweet.
And Andre, would you mind cutting? There we go. Vanta / whoops.
But yeah, in any case, here we are. So vanta.com/landing/SOC 2 in 2 weeks is the link there. But in any case,
got that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eric. Amazing content today. Would love everyone to unmute yourself and thank Eric for partnering with us on Founder University and helping us give this great content for free. Thank you, Eric.
Hey, congratulations.